Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining me. This is the root cause analysis call for the issue we detected on the 20th of April regarding the branches not rendering properly when they contain a slash. So I'll be your moderator, and Jamie on the call will be taking some notes. With me on the call, we have Marin, we have Lyle, Jamie, Brent, and Phil, and Ramya. So all of the relevant parties to this particular incident. And I'm just going to go through the agenda on the document, and down below we have an area for discussion. But please, if I am failing to describe something properly, don't hesitate to jump in, okay? So just to review the goal and the point of this meeting, so we're holding a blameless incident review that is focusing on balancing safety and accountability. Focus here on the blameless, we're looking to find the causes for this and what we can learn from this. The second point is learn and gain a better understanding of how the incident happened and where we continue to expose ourselves to risks and vulnerabilities. The third point is to identify corrective actions that take steps to mitigate those vulnerabilities. So I have a section down below in the document so that we can take notes while we talk about these corrective actions. And I added a fourth, so to please refrain from identifying the customer by name in the doc and in the call so that we can circulate this broadly at ease. Any comments there? All good, all clear? Awesome, thank you. So I will now proceed to do a short summary of the incident so that everybody's on the same page. So on the 20th of April, we deployed an update to production that broke the encodings of URLs in the repository file browser when the branch name includes a slash. After this was deployed on the 20th of April, there was multiple reports on Slack, and there was at least one in the customer internal Slack channel, one in the G-Delivery Slack channel, another in production Slack channel, which then in turn triggered the dev escalation channel. And Marin provided a good insight in the comment that he left in the issue. If you want to read a little bit more. Marin, do you want to add any comment right now?
No, I think
okay.
We have things in written. Thanks.
Thank you. And after that, we immediately started reverting another MR that we suspected was the cause for this problem. While we were discussing this on Slack, and we jumped on a call in the delivery channel, I believe, we were discussing the feature flag that could be turned off and what was the impact of that feature flag being turned off. And it turned out that no major feature would be lost, just rendering the repository browser in HAML would be the result. So we then decided to turn off that feature flag globally on gitlab.com to work around the issue. And again, no critical functionality was lost when we did this. We also kicked off working on a fix for the actual problem. And by quickly merging the fix and the delivery team, quickly picking up the fix to the stable branches, we were able to avoid this from shipping in 12.10.0, which was just 2 days away, I must remind you. I will add a note, which is related to this, is that after this whole incident was fixed, merged, and corrected, and re-enabling the feature flag, which is down below in the timeline, we uncovered 3 related incidents, which was one related to the private projects that was failing to rendering the repository browser as well. Another issue with branch names containing the plus sign was also causing some issues. And then a third one was when the issue was an issue with rendering the repository browser when the commit messages included an emoji. Okay, so they are not directly relevant to this incident, but they might be worthwhile keeping in mind when we're discussing corrective actions and the impact of this. So that's it for the summary. It's a very short summary and overview of this. Any comments before I move on to root cause? Okay, thank you. So in the essence of the RCA, we're trying to get to the root cause by asking the 5 whys in sequence. So the problem that we had was that the branches with the slash in the name would not render the repository file tree. So the first question, why? The reason why that wasn't rendering was because we deployed a dependency update that broke the escaping of the URLs when navigating through the repository browser. So why did we do that? And the reason is because when we were developing that merge request, the tests didn't fail. So they gave us the green pipeline, even though they were changing the way that URLs were using the escape function to use the encode URI component, which is more recommended. The test didn't cause any alert. So why didn't the tests cause any alert? The reason there is because while we had tests to cover the loading of the repo file tree when the branches have slashes in the name, we didn't cover the scenario of navigating to other folder. So why? Why didn't we have those? So because we had worked on the merge request recently and added tests for the case of branch names with slashes and hashes, the thing is that these tests only tested that the view router was able to render the proper components on the UI. So why did we only do that? So we assume that the RSpec feature test and end-to-end tests covered this feature really well, given the maturity of this feature and how long it was working without hitches. So this is referring to how long we've had the repository browser on GitLab. That's in the years timescale. And also another factor into this is that we don't have a way to set up integration tests for this through Jest yet. And for that, we need to figure out how to mock Apollo, which is something that we're looking into. So this is a brief overview of the root cause, and we've drilled down into the parts where we assumed some tests were there. We were confident that we had some coverage, but there was some slight variation that even though we tested it loading, we didn't test it navigating, and we didn't uncover this properly before merging the initial fix, and also we didn't uncover this when the dependency update was also merged, because there are two merge requests here that are related, and I'll go a little bit more into detail right now on the timeline. Any comments here on the root cause? Did we miss anything? Okay, I'll move on. Thank you. So on the timeline, we can see that on the 9th of April, which is significantly a few weeks before, we were working on a merge request that was meant to address the bug with branches that have a hash sign. And this was merged into master on the 9th of April. That merge request was deployed into production on the 14th of April. Then no issues were reported around that after that deploy. Then on the 17th of April, the merge request I mentioned before with the dependency update was merged into master, okay? After a few days, on the 20th of April, 1:30 p.m. UTC, that's when that merge request with the dependency update was deployed into production. The customer reports came in that day at 4 p.m., roughly 3 hours later. So that was 4:05 p.m. Then we had a thread on delivery. We started opening on the merge request to revert the suspected cause, which was this initial one. So we suspected that the cause for this was the initial merge request that had been worked on recently, which is a fair assumption, by the way. And here that, sorry, where am I? There we go, merge request open to revert. That's when we had the Zoom call. We discussed the disabling of the feature flag, and the feature flag was disabled at 4:50 p.m., roughly 45 minutes after being reported. This was successful in providing the client with a workaround to be able to be unblocked and continue their work as they used to. Soon after that, we created an issue to track the fix. That was the P1S1 that triggered this RCA. We started working also on a merge request with the definitive fix, something that we identified as soon as we pulled in the engineer that worked on this, is that the merge request we were reverting wasn't actually the cause for this, and it made sense because it had been online for several weeks by the time that it was reported. And then we identified this dependency update that was very recent, deployed to production, and that was a far more clear, responsible for this problem. So on the 20th of April at 9 p.m., we merged to master the definitive fix. So we never ended up reverting, we did end up reverting the merge request that was that we suspected to be the cause first, because that had already been picked into the stable branch. So what we did with the definitive fix was we reverted the revert to recover that commit, and we added the actual fix. That was merged 20th of April, 9 p.m. UTC. So, and that fix was picked into stable by the delivery team on the 20th of April at 10:36 p.m., very shortly after. So in that, assuring that this problem would not be released on the 22nd on 12.10.0. So the definitive fix is deployed to production on the 21st of April. So this is already the day after at 5 p.m. And shortly after, we enabled, for precaution, we enabled it only for GitLab org/GitLab projects. This allowed us to give it some time to test, to make sure that we didn't have any problems with that fix. And we enabled, sorry, there's some issues here. The date is wrong. This was on the 21st. So we enabled the feature flag in production for gitlab.org on the 21st of April, 7 p.m. Yes, only 2 hours after the deploy. This allowed us to test to see if the problem was properly fixed. We didn't rush to enable this globally because the repository browser was fully working and we didn't want to cut any corners here. And we waited until the 23rd at 8 a.m., which was the time that the engineer, Phil, logged on so that he could follow up any reports during the course of that day. And so from that moment on, the feature flag was back on. For this particular incident, that was the end of the impact of this. As a summary, and by the way, that's when we enabled it globally. So all projects in gitlab.com were getting the new repository browser. So as a summary for the duration of the incident, so the repository file browser failed to load on gitlab.com for branches with slashes in the name for 3 hours and 30 minutes. The time taken for fix after the issue identification, and fix here, I'm talking about the mitigation from the user's perspective, was 45 minutes. That was the time that it took us to flip the feature flag off so that the users were unblocked and not affected by this problem. And the time taken for fix to be merged and deployed after issue identification was 1 day, 1 hour, and 2 minutes. And this was the actual fix we developed, we merged, and then reaching out production. So that's an overview of the timeline. This is the things we know about this incident. And does anybody has any comment on the timeline? Did we miss any particular incident that we should expand anymore than we did? Okay. So I would now open the floor for discussion, and I would go first for the what went well. And Jamie, you had 1 point. Do you want to vocalize?
Sure. Thanks, Andre. Just celebrating how quick that we were to, from time that the customer identified a breakage here to time to a fix, even if it wasn't the definitive fix and the true root cause. 45 minutes is at least in my view, pretty good.
Thanks, Jamie. I would add that we had been considering removing this feature flag recently, and this incident showed us that it's very valuable to keep them probably longer than we think it's safe. Anybody else wants to highlight anything else that went well with this particular incident? I would add a praise for how quick the delivery team was to react into pushing this into the release, because remember, this was the 20th of April with the release on the 22nd, and I feel like we're very tight schedule, and despite some things that didn't go so well, I think we avoided potential higher impact by shipping that. Any other comments? Okay, so probably we can go to what went wrong. And if you remember anything that went well later, please add it to the document. We'll come back to it. So what went wrong? Maren, do you want to vocalize your point?
Yeah, just a remark here that identifying stakeholders for a specific page in the application or the specific functionality is in some cases nearly impossible. So, for example, I would have never guessed that the page that got broken belonged to any of your front-end teams, especially. To me, it's a page that comes both front-end, back-end, and everything together with it, and I wouldn't know where to turn. So by us escalating in multiple channels, it feels like we got to a quick resolution because enough people observed the channel, but I don't know whether this was the case because we knew where to go. So basically what I'm trying to say, did we resolve this quickly by sheer luck or because we knew exactly where to go?
That's a great question, Maren. I would add that Phil, the engineer that worked on this, suggested that the escalation process right now, the InfraDev escalation process right now is not accounting for front end particularly, is mostly focused on back end issues because that's what we've been monitoring mostly on the past. And his question was, should we consider adding front end to the rotation? And my question to you, Maren, do you think that it would help by having someone on the InfraDev escalation process for this incident from the front end team and accounting that we do have a front-end counterpart for the delivery team, which happens to be me. But do you think it would help to have, because I was online because I was about to leave the computer. So do you think it would help?
So this is from my perspective. I don't think it would help because I don't think the current dev escalation process is also helping in the majority of cases that we are seeing. Actually, if nothing else, I believe that having also a front-end counterpart might confuse the situation even further, because then you don't have like a single escalation point. You need to escalate to multiple people in the moment of incident. And what if a front-end person answers and we are looking into deep guts of GitLab trying to understand what's happening with an understanding that front-end, in majority of the cases, does not know Ruby or, well, basically everything behind front-end. I would leave that also to Brent, or call out Brent to maybe he can comment.
Yeah. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into dev escalation, but I think one of the things that would help is actually having a clear path to escalate from that tier 1 dev escalation support. So basically, we have the development engineer on call for 4 hours, 4-hour shifts. But where we sort of run out of gas is when we need to find a domain expert. And so I think in this case, if we had routed this through infra, then we had escalated to dev, or vice versa, being able to say, oh, I need to page this person, which I know we don't have a distinct paging mechanism right now, but I need to page like you as manager, or somebody that's a domain expert from the front end to come in. I think that would be something that would be helpful, or would have been helpful, I think, in situations like this. Right. And I'll give one more example. Like, we had an incident yesterday where it had to do with something very specific to the product. And while we got the dev on call, I had to reach around to find ask a lot of people and bug a lot of people in order to get to like a domain expert. And so I think just a general, in general, having that secondary escalation and development of domain experts for the larger bits of functionality would, I think, not so much in this case because mitigation was pretty quick, but I think in the common case, help us with mitigation time.
Thanks, Brent. We are rolling out a new process for identifying domain experts, and that might help in just covering the product better in that sense. Thank you. Any other comments to this? Go ahead.
If you're rolling out that, one ask from my side would be, please help us understand what actually the meaning of some of the names for the domains expert are. Because if I go and look at the branches page, will I know the domain expert is someone is in stage create underscore something underscore the other thing? Unlikely, especially in an incident situation. What I will be looking for is who owns this branches page. How do I find it out? Well, I can't go to the categories because this is not actually listed there. So how will I find that out?
That's a great question, Maren. So what you're suggesting or hinting at is if you had a way to quickly map a URL to an owner.
Let's say that, yes, a feature to an owner, an URL to an owner, yeah.
Okay.
Because we can call a branches page feature as well, right? It is a feature that you can look at the branches.
Yeah, it happens to be owned by the same people on the rest of the page. But for example, the merge request page, that's not true. The merge request widget has sections for secure, sections for source code. So you are absolutely correct. I feel like this would be a great help. It's already noted down, and we probably could derive a corrective action here, which is find a way to map feature to owner, whatever that might mean. But it feels like it's a great corrective action here. So thank you. Any other comments to this particular point that we're discussing, or can we move on to Brand's point of incident routing?
So yeah, this is more of a socialization issue. Like we've had a couple of, actually just as recently as Saturday, where things got escalated directly to dev, which makes sense when, you know, it's clear that that's where, you know, deployment went out and something negative happened in this occurring incident, but I need to close the loop there. And while I've updated the infrastructure pages to indicate how and when to page SRE, I need to make sure that I close the loop and put that within the dev escalation workflow as well. So I'm just calling this out here. I think we're all I'm constantly beating that drum, and so we're all well aware of it. I was clearing the issue as well. So I just wanted to call it out here, something that I know is going better. Saturday's incident, as the example, was repeated this week, and it was routed through infrastructure. But yeah, so I just wanted to call this out here.
But did yesterday's incident get routed through infrastructure?
Which yeah, that one got routed to. Well, actually.
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't.
Sorry, that was a trick question.
It was a trick question, right? No, I forgot. I actually had stumbled upon it, and then you actually had stumbled upon it, I think initially first. So
yes,
yeah.
Because the same routing happened. Like it went from a customer channel to dev escalation, which then I used. I saw and pinged the people who could help, and then we initiated the incident process.
My brain rewrote history, yeah.
You know, sometimes difficult things you want to forget. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that we still have this problem, and we need to find a way to route correctly from those customer channels.
Yeah, I want to bring that up. So thank you, Maren, for surfacing that. I'm doing what I can. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, Jamie. I'll go ahead. Sorry.
No, I don't mind, Brent.
Oh, I just wanted to call out that I think Slack is the wrong place for escalations at all. I honestly think that paging should be the mechanism, and that allows us to centralize things. And paging can be as simple as emailing an email address, which we've started implementing within SRE as well. Because that gets us out of the loop of, I think one of the things that went well, luckily here, is we had one main Slack thread for this, but I've seen incidents, even when we've used the mechanisms to page the SRE on call and the incident manager on call, where there's 3 different Slack discussions going on and having to corral that. And so I think having a centralized paging, which I know is difficult at this point because development's not part of it, part of the paging infrastructure, but I think that is one of the gaps that we have at the moment.
Super well said. That was exactly where I was headed. The good news is, at least in this particular customer case, they are getting better and better about going through the proper channels. And the challenge that I've got as TAM to this customer is training them to do that well. But I have seen like senior management on their side actually stop folks in their tracks and say, Slack is not the way. And totally agree, Brent, that oftentimes I feel the only value I'm adding is copy, pasting, transposing from one Slack thread to another, or maybe even in a different Slack workspace. And that is just super fragile and also just super, it's a lot of friction, and it's like a single point of failure. Really not a good way of working.
Cool, thanks for that, everyone. Is there any action we can take out of this, or is it kind of already established what we're doing, Brent?
I'm continuing to work with Chun and the rest of development on getting an actual paging rotation, whether that's PagerDuty or some other tooling to allow us to just route like these customer requests, because I think we use something like emergency at, things like that, or allowing an easy button for people like Jamie, who are TAMs to some of our larger customers. They can just hit a button, essentially, whatever that button might be, and get just people engaged in supporting an incident on GitLab.com. So that's all said. That I'm continuing to work through this through with development, and this isn't related precisely to this issue. It's just something that I think was good to call out here.
Okay, sounds good to me. Any other comments here on the incident routing, or can we move on to Ramia's point? Bless you, Jamie. All right, Ramia.
Yeah. So test gap for the specific corner case, right? So that's something I felt should be discussed, and I think it goes in line with Madam's questions as well, which is mentioned below. So so just wanted to understand the kind of tests that we had as well, and as the end-to-end tests. We do have few tests, but definitely not just corner case is what I see. So I'm just trying to understand, and I just wanted to discuss about the same, how we can add more coverage, and also how to prevent such things in future, maybe doing a test gap analysis of like how we did for a few other things as well. Like what I mean by that is just look at the specs and the tests at different layers, at different levels, like maybe unit tests and component tests and end-to-end tests, and ensure that there is enough coverage for specific features. So that's something that we have done. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention as well. That exercise helps here. And another thing that comes to my mind is about squad planning itself. So this is basically, squad planning is basically involving the quality team itself, right? And wherever the quality team's input is needed in any of the release items. So do we have any improvements in those lines? So that is another thing that I wanted to talk about as well. So do you have any thoughts around these?
Yeah, I can start with the first. How can you get more coverage and prevent these gaps in the future, or what kind of gaps we have in this particular scenario? And I'll speak a little bit because Phil is having some connectivity issues. So Phil, please interrupt me if you have anything else to add. So one of the things we've been looking at, this was particularly a tricky issue because when we refactored the HAML Ruby implementation that we had for the repository browser, we did try to mimic as much as we can things on the front end. However, there was some confidence or assumptions of test coverage on the RSpec side that we saw, right, it's there, we recovered, we're fine. Then we went on to Vue, and then when we moved over a few things into Vue, we realized, like this incident, is that there's a significant amount of behavior that is not covered by tests, but is assured by the way that Rails handles things. When we move it over to Vue, so for example, the emoji part is one of them. Like we're not rendering. Apparently Rails is rendering Markdown on the commit messages, but we don't have any tests for that. So when we moved over to Vue, we didn't do that part, so the test didn't fail in that sense. And it was only uncovered months after this feature was turned on, by the way. This feature has been turned on for a couple of months now. I can't remember exactly the date, But this just goes to show how silent these scenarios are. So the branch name with a slash is potentially more common than emojis on commit messages, but a lot of these are not covered by the RSpec tests, but Rails is ensuring that it works. So that's one of the things is we're seeing when these refactors happen, we need to be extra careful in doing an audit on the test coverage before passing things into view, which is something we've been taking lightly, or more lightly than we should. Let's put it that way. How can we identify these? I apart from an audit and just being very vigilant about developing new features or refactors, there's some work that can be done about having any feature that is being prepared for a refactor just go through the use cases and take time to go through the edge use cases. If we come up with a list like that, we can then double check if the tests are covering every use case that has been identified. And this is a work also for UX that we can involve in that thing with frameworks like jobs to be done. It's very useful to do that. But that's kind of where I fall. I don't have anything else to add to that point. Anything else? Anybody has any other points here? How can we prevent and get more coverage here? So I would actually go a little bit further, which is something that we have identified, is that we're not able to do proper integration tests at the moment with Vue or with Jest actually. And that's probably one of the things that we're going to be looking out of this is how can we take steps into be able to write a user scenario that will take the whole path of the user through the applications, because we're building building applications on the front end that are more and more interactive. It's no longer just rendering page, switch page, rendering page. They're becoming much more interactive. And this particular thing is the performance boost that we had with this development of doing the repository browser in Vue is significant. Like when you're traveling from folder to folder, it's a huge bonus, but then the complexity gets even further into when we want to test these things. And we definitely need integration tests there. Now, I don't know if the plan is to have some sort of increasement of coverage on the end-to-end tests, if that kind of replaces that. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, Ramya?
As far as the end-to-end tests, they are a bit costly. So, as you know, right? So, getting all the corner cases, I think it might be a challenge. So I think ideally the corner cases should be covered at a lower level, maybe at the component level is what I think. But having said that, at least for this case, what I actually feel is like to the existing tests, we could just make some tweaks, like say, we could just change the branch name, and we definitely have similar workflow. So that should take care of adding more coverage. So some such tweaks might be helpful rather than adding like altogether separate tests just exclusively for a specific corner case. Maybe we could identify such places in the end-to-end test rather than just using a plain branch name, right? Like it could serve both the purpose of just checking the normal functionality as well as adding the corner case into the workflow as well. So that's
Okay, so being a little bit like adding a couple of tweaks could help us get us far.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to also bring discuss about is, do you think like any kind of visual regression test might be helpful? Something like before we do the refactor, we have this workflow and we have the screenshot or the how the UI looks like, and after the refactor, just use the previous one as the base. Like the golden set, and just double check if there are any just something of that. I think the front end team has some sort of tooling around that, right?
On the GitLab UI side, yes, not on GitLab project, but that's being discussed on other forums. And to your question, the way we refactor this has been very iterative. So we've been building the application bits by bits. There was bits that was the LFS badge, other bits that were the locked files.
So the visual regression would be useful to identify the things that are missing. I'm not sure if we would have caught this if we didn't bake into those tests the edge cases. So I think it always boils down to identifying what are the edge cases, because we can have the visual regression, and if we test the visual regression on a branch name properly, just rendering, that would be perfect. But if we had the steps to navigate to other folders in those branches, we would have cut this, but we would have cut this on our spec as well. So I think the basic problem for this is, or not the basic, the basis, the root is to have like the edge cases covered in some way, regardless of what kind of test we have.
Sure. Yeah. I agree with that. Yep. And the next point that I mentioned is about quad planning, right? So that's about that's something that we started, I think, in Feb, and we have been trying to improve it as well. So I think that would be another place where we could improve as well. Meaning, this is nothing but involving security as part of the release, like as part of the discussion itself, right? Like, say there is a release item for the upcoming release, then just get quality teams input as well. So the SETs would basically go through the feature or the change that's happening, and they would just add the input from the quality perspective, like the kind of test that needs to be added, or the kind of test that few things which needs to be addressed before we actually ship the feature. So I think this would be another essential thing. I think this is something that I mean, we had been doing it for the past 3 months, but I think there is still a lot of room for improvement as well. So that's something that I want to do.
And it's welcome. The help has been amazing. I would add probably that something that is not in the radar of quad planning is dependency updates, which was the root cause for this. So this was the merge request that broke essentially the feature silently.
Okay.
And that's because they were updating the, this is something that is semi-automated. But for example, they were just rewriting this for that, right? And this involvement, like this is not a planned deliverable. This is just backstage, just taking care of things. So that one thing that is probably worth putting in the quad planning visibility, or just requiring an approval from a test manager, someone from the quality team on the stage would probably be useful. Maybe something we can build into the process of GitLab bot. I'm not sure, but potentially I definitely feel there needs to be involvement there as well, because potentially they could have caught this here. And see that, right, we're changing this. I don't think we have tests for that. That knowledge might be useful to have. So maybe add a required approval there. I don't know, for dependency updates, and getting them involved in dependency update work. I think it's crucial. Any other thoughts around quad planning? Okay, so with that in mind, I'll move on to suggestions or outstanding questions, and perhaps we can go to Maren straight up, as this is an outstanding question.
Yeah, I think I got covered with my question, so I don't think we need to answer that because I think Ramya was identifying a lot of these.
But there's one thing that is important to mention here, Maren, is that one of the latest fixes that we've done was to move the encoding of the URLs of the branch names to the backend, so that we use the same methodology as we used to use in the Hamel days. And that was kind of like not a desperate, we could go and write a test for all the special characters that could be in a branch name that Git accepts as a Git branch. But we just resolved into going for the old way of doing it, because that was tested, with time tested. But I'm not opposed into finding a branch name that is so robust that it covers all special characters, like those email regular expression things we've seen in the past. So could be a possibility of adding one scenario for that test coverage, but the solution there was going back to what we used to use on the before the refactor. Okay, and you have the next question as well, Maren. Oh, you covered that. You mentioned that we covered that.
We covered that.
All right. All right. There's no other comments here on the document, but please, does anybody has any other things to mention that we didn't cover, we didn't touch?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, sorry. So for this pigeons in particular, it's sort of all fallen on me. So all this knowledge around how the front end of this feature is built, it's all just in my brain. In this case, it wasn't so because I was checking Slack. If it was maybe like a few weeks earlier when I was off on parental leave, it could have taken much longer to actually fix the problem correctly. So I think it's something we probably need to fix on the front end team on our side.
Yep. Thanks for raising, Phil. I forgot to put this in the document. This was mentioned on the issue. That's why I forgot to put it in the document. So this is something that we're going to be looking inside the teams to circulate more the assignments. We've been having very specialized work. Some people focus on approval rules, and the refactor has been mostly owned by Phil. And to his point, that is actually true and something we're looking forward to improving in the way we schedule and do assignments about rotating people on topics inside source code. That's more internally, but still a great point to make. Okay. Anything else that you might want to add to the discussion? From my perspective, I think it would be useful. I think, Brent, you've already alluded to this, that there's work being done about clarifying more about how these process of the RCAs and incident reviews need to be taken care of, so that there's an alignment of expectations in terms of time to deliver reports, that kind of thing, that I think we can definitely do a little bit better. And yeah, so that's kind of my point. Do you have any comments you want to mention right now, Brent, or is that just happening somehow?
No, it's just happening. I have a work in progress MR, and I'm going to continue to socialize this in the InfraDev calls and just make sure it's widely pushed out there. And also coupling that with the, how do we effectively escalate incidents? Because right now we're stuck with Slack being a workflow for a lot of it. And, of course, well, rare, it's like, what if Slack's down, or what if there's actually data that, we don't want to have in Slack? But anyway, I'll add the point here. Good.
Thanks, Brent. Okay, I think that takes care of that. So before I go through each corrective actions, does anybody has any other comment before we move on? Okay, so moving on, just to give a brief overview of the corrective actions. Please let me know if we missed any of the discussion. So one is, and I'll create issues for all of these and link them in the RCA issue so that we can all follow through into these. So one is finding a way to map a URL or route or feature to an owner, whatever that might mean, to assist in identifying the owner for problematic areas. Second, bringing dependency update visibility to quad planning, which is what we already mentioned. Investigate required approvals as part of dependency updates. That's probably the same issue, but I'll take care of that later. Brent identified this issue. Ensure we test rendering for branches that have slash and hash. Okay, that's one of the quality department issues. Okay, Brent, documentation of view router functionality, see fields note above. Okay, we'll definitely work on that. I'm not entirely clear on what this means, but I probably missed something.
So Phil had noted like all this knowledge around how front-end features, view router are currently built is. Yeah.
So I think he meant about the repository browser, not necessarily the view router. Okay. The view router is a component that is generically used a bunch of things like design management as well. This is particularly about the repository browser, which I would say 90% of the deliverables on this feature has been worked by him. Got it. Thanks I'm glad we clarified that. Brent, socializing incident management and incident response workflow updates in InfraDev calls and with other stakeholders. Good. So I'll leave that up to you, Brent, to own and to carry on forward. And the last one, implement rotation schedule on topics functionality within front-end team so that knowledge is not concentrated to one person only. Okay, that's basically something for me to take care of in assignments. Any other corrective actions we didn't cover? Okay, so I guess that takes it. Thank you, everyone, for joining this call. It's been very useful and a lot of learnings here. Thank you, Jamie, for the note taking. Very useful. And does anybody object into uploading this into GitLab Unfiltered and publishing the document together with it? Is there any objections? Okay, so I'll take care of that right after this. And thank you all for coming and for the time you spent today.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.